All right, welcome back to the Grizzly Brothers podcast. This is I've been looking forward to this one. We have Mr. Cliff Gray on the podcast with us, resident expert in all things Western hunting, outdoors. I mean, you name it. The guy's a wealth of knowledge. So, Cliff, appreciate you taking the time to chat with us for a bit, and just kind of want to pick your brain. We'll just open discussion here. So, yeah,
Yeah,
thanks
no,
for joining us.
awesome.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. I got a feeling that given that you sent me a bear call that you make, I might be picking your brain about calling bears more than you're picking my brain, but I'm up for whatever, man.
Well, right before we started, we clicked record. You said something that kind of piqued my interest. You said, "Oh, I might explain why I don't really do a lot of calling with my bear hunting." I know you have a ton of experience hunting bears, guiding bear hunts. So let's start there. I mean, coming from us, who that's our primary method of hunting bears is calling. Tell me
Sure.
your perspective.
Yeah. So I guess to give it like a little context, man, I and not to get like too deep right off the bat, but I find it very interesting about like the world of hunting. I'm for sure I would say like more well known, or kind of my personal brand is really twisted into the whole elk hunting world, and it was a big part of like what I did for a living. The elk hunting component of it. It kind of runs the whole Western hunting world. But I think if I did the numbers, I've guided more bear hunts than I have elk hunts. And I think quite a few more, and just because of the spring dynamic for I don't know, I had like basically until my oldest kid was 7 or 8, I was going to British Columbia for 5 or 6 weeks every spring, and it just getting like a ton of reps up there, and that's all spot and stock spring stuff. And then when I had my outfitting business in Colorado, I was I don't want to say the first guy, but I think one of the very first guys there that really started to hunt, like make the fall spot and stock bear hunting in Colorado kind of a thing. And there was a lot of different things going on there at the time. Like, one, the state reduced the non-resident tags to like $100, and then and they did that because there was a bunch of bears. I have a history in Colorado, kind of in and out through my childhood. Also, we were talking about, you guys are Californians. I also spent some of my childhood there, but in Colorado, when I was a kid, there was way fewer bears, and it's probably because like the livestock, there's much more domestic grazing on all those wilderness areas that I grew up around, and then they ended up being areas that I outfitted in as an adult. But there was way more domestic livestock grazing on them when I was a kid, and those guys hammered bears. From a predator control perspective, particularly domestic sheep guys. So I think that just naturally we were seeing a big kind of influx of bears coming off like decades of probably a pretty low, or suppressed bear population in Colorado. So I kind of hit that right too. So I did a lot of spot and stock guiding on both fronts, spring and fall, kind of within that. And then here recently, the last couple of years, I've been back to doing both again too. Um, it's funny though, the calling thing, how I didn't even really know it was a thing until somebody recommended that I listen to Wayne Carlson's DVDs. Are you guys familiar with his?
I've heard of him, yeah.
Oh, but you've never watched them.
I've never watched him.
Oh, dude, they're great. Well,
I've got
they're great because he's like he was a character.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, he passed away, I think, just a couple months ago. But he was like my first introduction to bear calling, and he's so enthusiastic about it in those videos, man. And if you guys can't find it, like, hit me up, because it may be hard to find. I think I have a like one of the it was DVD, right? I don't know that it's available online anywhere, streaming or anything. But anyways, you can tell it's like how he prefers to hunt bears, and like all the call-in sequences of these bears, essentially like running to him. It's just cool. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So I got the bug. Because of that. And then, I mean, that was I say 5 years ago. That was honestly probably 10 years ago. It's just like time flies by. And then when I've gotten the opportunity, at least in my mind, I I'll call bears in, but usually it's when I'm hunting on my own and like I'm between guiding or something, and just it's like a long path to get to the answer to the question. For me personally, calling bears in has been a very much a binary outcome. You know what I mean? Like I get them to respond. It well, it and I like this is the problem, guys. I'm going to ask you guys a bunch of questions.
That's
I
fine. Yeah.
have I have never had luck calling in bears into like a where I don't see them. Like I'm just dry setting up and just calling in bears like I would
Blind calling.
coyotes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've never had that. All my success bear calling in bears has been bears that I glassed up and then called in. Um, which probably some people hear that and they're like, well, why would you do that? And my answer personally is because it's really fun. And there's an odd situation where it just makes sense because of like the terrain, getting there, whatever, right? Like there's these other reasons, but that's been the most of my bear calling. And the reason I haven't done it when I'm guiding a lot is because of that binary outcome. Really, I just don't want to. I've always called, had them literally like peek around, look, and then start running towards me, or I've had them either just like mosey off, run off, or ignore me. So I only get the two outcomes. You know what I mean? So if you're guiding in the world of like spot and stock stuff, there's not a lot of situations where like you're willing to take the binary outcome. Does that make sense, Clayton?
Yeah, it does. A follow up question to that:
Yeah.
are most of your experiences with that binary outcome you're talking about, is that in spring or fall?
Yeah, so mostly in the spring.
So we had our first foray into spring bear hunting this year. Obviously, California doesn't have a spring season, so the
Sure.
vast majority of our bear hunting is done in the fall. And you asked the question, or you said some might ask the question, why would you call a bear that you could see? Well, for us, it's because we're archery hunting.
Oh, okay, sure.
I've killed quite a few bears, all with archery equipment, just because I fill my tag during archery. It never survives to rifle season, and
Yeah.
that's how we get them in tight. Is we'll just call them in. So I am curious about the like the genetics of a bear and if they recognize that, because we use a fawn in distress. That's what our call is based on. If they recognize that call might be too early, because a lot of our fawns are dropping right now. We were just in the
Yeah.
woods a couple weeks ago, and a few days old fawns everywhere.
Yeah,
So
so yeah, and it's interesting you say that because I always laugh because I have some clients in Colorado too, and your guys' elk rut like months different than ours too,
Mhm.
right? Or excuse me, in California, the elk in California rut much earlier, right?
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, so there's like this big timing difference. So in the spring, a lot of the seasons overlap when elk and mule deer start to calve. So there is kind of that natural time period, and I don't know that's when I've had luck. Clayton is like second week of June, first week of June, and the other thing about that is in most areas where you're spring bear hunting, by the time you get to the first week of June, your other your the other styles of hunting become a little less. They become a little less successful just because the bears tend to get more dispersed. Like you're not right up against a bunch of snow where the bears are contained where they can feed and that sort of thing. And then you've got the rut occurring about the same time. Like, and I say rut like general because the spring rut in most areas, like really, Idaho where I've guided a lot in the spring, and then also up, in British Columbia, like the what I would call like the rut of bear rut is like the first week of June ish, right? So you've got boars that are starting to roam around that period of time, and then you've also got them starting to think about elk calves and mule deer fawns. So our timing there, like for calling, actually fits. But I have called them in during the fall when it doesn't really make sense. Does that do you follow that?
yeah, I guess our experience has been the opposite.
Oh,
Like
okay.
in our limited experience, like
Well, also you got to remember our season, our archery season, deer archery season here is second or third week of August, and we've got a bunch of young fawns still. Third week of August in
Sure.
California, and probably most places. I mean, usually they're getting to where bears can't catch them anymore,
Yeah,
but
they're up moving
um,
around.
but I think the Bears still have that program set. You know what I mean? Because a few weeks before they were catching a lot of fawns, if that
Right.
makes any sense. And so we've had exceptional response to calling in the fall. I mean, to give you an example, we've been calling bears for several years. I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years. We really have like dedicated to calling them and called in dozens of bears. And I had the very first one last year that I could visually see and didn't respond to the call ever for me.
Oh,
So
really? Okay.
yeah, so
Yeah,
we
yeah.
generally for us, it's like if we see a bear, we know we can probably kill that bear because we're going
Yeah.
to call it right into 16, 15 yards, whatever, however close we let them come. Obviously, conditions, you know, are correct and everything, but the it's really interesting. I don't know the timeline, and I think the locations have something to do with it. Bear, I mean, obviously, bear behavior and their diet and wherever they may be, because we've had mixed reviews from other people, different areas calling. I know we've also got a very high bear population in California, so that
Well,
helps us out a ton.
yeah, and that might be just because it's like a competitive type of thing too, like free meal, they're gonna come for it. But the other thing, Ben, is it could also be that like you're talking to me and you're talking to other people where it's not the primary strategy. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
even what I just said on dates, I mean that could be completely geared on it happens to be when I call.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
if I'm
not
sitting like
data.
in the fall, I'm sitting acorns or sitting choke cherries or something like that. Um, I just I probably don't tend to do it. You know what I mean? So and I don't know for I have to really get diligent about it and and focus on it to tell you. But I don't think my data set is enough to tell you like at least in the topographies I'm in like when it makes the most sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we've called them to answer your or to address the blind calling thought. Probably, what do you think, Clayton? 50-50 blind calling versus, well, we've called more blind calling than we have visually at this point. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
originally we started out doing the same thing. You were like, well, if I see one, I'll call to him to get a better shot or whatever, you know. But then we were like, dude, this is so effective because every bear we ever saw and called to just ran straight at us.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, let's just start blind calling them like coyotes. And then it was like, I mean, very high success rate of calling it a bear in from a blind set in the areas we hunt, which have a high bear population. But I mean, we've called 2 and 3 bears into the same set simultaneously. I mean, it's works so well for us. That's why we developed the call, because we were kind of going back and forth between, I was using an elk cow call with Reed and making kind of a fawn call out of that. And when I had it, and then we were dissecting other fawn calls and stuff. And we're like, you know
Sure.
what? Let's just make the sound we want, really good quality, real sounding fawn sound. So we developed that call, and that's what we've been using since then, and deadly effective. And the blind calling, I mean, because if you hunted bears, been around long enough, like, okay, this kind of area is a good bedding area for a bear. Given the slope angle and the tree, the vegetation and whatever, you kind of know, and
Sure.
you see stomp trails and whatever. And if you know the area, even better. Um, but we've also just blind called into places we've never been before, just random topography, and then just a bear pops out, looking, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
that works.
Yeah, I
So
mean, dude, it's crazy interesting to hear because I don't know in the areas that I hunt, Ben, I don't know anybody that's doing that. And I'm not saying that it doesn't work. It may just be like an opportunity that's not. I mean, I've run into these things like over the years in like hunting. Like I don't really shy away from anything being potentially like very effective just because it's not being used.
right.
Because like maybe years ago it was. I don't know because like things ebb and flow. I see that all like today, man. I have this conversation all the time. Not to like sidetrack to a different species, but there are strategies in the elk hunting world that are not used now that are deadly effective, and they were used 30 years ago as a
Mhm.
primary means to kill elk, and it's just a cultural thing. Like just nobody does it anymore, but
Do
it
you
works.
think perhaps there's a curve that is, how much of that do you think plays in from animal like education, from us educating them in a certain geography where like certain type of calling or a certain approach, do you think they become educated to those kind of things and then kind of shy away from that? And then that moves the cultural trend amongst hunters to use a different type of approach, or do you think that doesn't have anything to do with it?
Yeah, like they, I don't, dude, I don't know. I know exactly where you're going with it, and I don't know the answer to it. It's basically like, the guy fishing the bass pond. They're all using the same lure, and then the guy shows up with a new lure, and all of a sudden starts to catch them, and then they figure that one out, and then they're not hitting it anymore. Um, I don't, I really don't, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It seems I can tell you, and other things, there's for sure cases where it does seem like elk, if somebody shows up with just a different call, like I noticed this on one particular place that I guide that has a really high density of elk. Every guide who guides there blows a diaphragm, because in our culture as elk hunters now, from on a human ear, a diaphragm's always going to always going to sound the best, because you can make the most variety of sound. You can make the most. You can fluctuate the volume the most. You can make the most, like, bugle that goes from low to high and back. You could do so much more with the reed. So all, like, guys that are out there as guides or whatever, they tend to drift towards diaphragms. But in that area, I know for a fact, because I've done it a lot. If you go to an open mouth reed call, or if you go to like a hoochie mama, like just an off the wall deal in Walmart, elk will respond to it better, and they'll respond to it more aggressively, because they've been getting called so much by guys with
Interesting.
diaphragms. And so I noticed that, and I would say that I noticed it enough that it's not anecdotal, but I don't know that it's like passed on or something. I really don't know the answer to that. You know what I mean? I will tell you with bears in particular, and I had a guy a long time ago. I knew a guy who had done a bunch of collaring of lions in Utah, and I got to talking to him, and he told me that he would. I'd have to pull up the study for you guys, but because it was well funded, and they caught the same lions over and over again. And the biggest takeaway that he had from it, as the houndsman that was doing it, is that these lions, they eat whatever their mom told them to eat. And you'll have a lion who, you have a big tom lion that he treed 10 times over this study, and every time he turned dogs out on like a 6x6 bull elk. That's what that lion killed, was 6x6 bull elk. And then he'd find another lion that would walk through elk all day long to kill mule deer bucks, and that's all he killed was mule deer bucks. And then he had some that only killed coyotes, which is like nobody even like talks about that. But they would literally, his theory was that whatever their mom taught them to kill, that was the primary thing that they killed over their life. And not to go like totally down this on bears, but I wonder, man, if that's not why on bears you see this giant fluctuation of bears that do kill calves and go to calving grounds, and bears that never do. I don't. There's a study, and I know the gal. She's a PhD student, I think, at New Mexico State, and I think now she has her PhD. But she did a bear study where they collared these bears, and you got bears that only a subset of the bears in the spring, or into the summer, they'll go like several hundred miles and hit calving grounds, eat calves, and then go back. And other bears will never go. You know what I
That's
mean? So
easy.
so so somehow those bears are getting information. Like, and I would think, with what I've noticed about bears, if I was gonna like take some things that I've observed and then stretch them to this conversation, I would say that if there's a difference between your guys' bears being more susceptible to calling than the bears that I hunt, which I don't know that that's the case because it's just anecdotally, but let's say that is the case, I would think that it might have something to do with that. Your bear population is doing more predation than my bear population. And I have a feeling that I guess one theory that I kind of pull out of my ass, but maybe it would make sense, is that where I'm hunting bears, I mean, once they can't, once an elk calf is born, a week later when that elk calf can get around, bear's not eating any meat. You know what I mean? Like, he's going off. The only time he's gonna kill much is going to be during that period of time, that calving chunk, and then he's basically a vegetarian slash
So,
like
you know what's
eatarian.
really interesting to think about here, and I just kind of have developed this thought. Well, this is something that's well known, but regarding this topic, is it kind of makes sense. This is like an active investigation here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and that, I mean, it's all yeah,
That our bears would be this way because California doesn't have much of an elk population to speak of on a whole. Compared most of the state,
sure,
it's very small compared to other Western states, and it's really concentrated in certain areas. We don't have a big sprawling elk herd. Um, so that being said, we do have quite a few lions, and they primarily feed on deer because really that's the only kind of big game animal around that we have is deer.
sure.
So our lions are eating deer, and our biologists confirm, and most do, that especially when the bear populations are as high as they are, that the bears will actually still steal the lion kills.
Oh, okay,
So the lions are killing, the bears are stealing, the lions have to kill more. So it's a problem we have with our herd where there's like this habituating thing going on where lions are killing more than they need because the bears are stealing their kills because bears can climb trees and all
sure.
find kills anywhere the lions can put them. So that makes me think that probably puts the bears in more access to fawn and deer meat than they would normally have because they're stealing these kills. They're following the lions around and taking their food.
Right.
So then that would probably make them more prone to want to find deer or come to a deer call, given that's a bigger part of their diet. Spitballing, but
Yeah, I think
interesting.
I mean, it's kind of like, I think our theories would be kind of similar, man. I think like a Colorado bear outside of calving season, he doesn't even think about eating meat unless it's like a
Yeah.
gut pile,
It's like a
like,
cow with big teeth, basically, at that point, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, they're basically that. I mean, I could go through the feed sources with you, but I mean, I watch them in the fall, and they're all eating. They're all eating, acorns. I mean, the primary feed in Colorado, that depends a little bit on, like, what topography you're in, what part of the state. But acorns run it, and then you've got choke cherry, and then service berry. So they, like, in the fall, and they'll that I mean that'll take they'll only eat that for like a 4.5 month period, because they have a bunch of elevation grade. So the ripeness of the different food sources actually like extends through that period of time. But I mean, not that I would see this, but I don't see or hear about black bears hunting anything in Colorado outside of calving season, and then they'll kill domestic sheep and stuff. But so that I mean the theory makes sense, man. They're just not eating that. I mean, you might be hunting bears that are just bigger meat eaters. But honestly, Ben, the theory might be that guys like me and other guys out there just aren't doing it.
I think that's a part of it as well
You
because
know,
you gotta think, these animals are also hardwired. They have
sure.
that natural predator instinct. When they hear those fawns in calving season, they're on them. They're bam, you've seen videos and stuff. You may have seen it in person. I mean, those things they just go 100 miles an hour when they find a
Oh
fawn.
yeah, dude. The Bears in that would be like a question I have for you guys. The Bears that I have called in, um, they are all like running,
Yeah.
like running towards me.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Which makes it pretty fun. But I would say that they were like, it was not. They were not curious. Like, they were coming. They were coming to kill something or eat something or whatever. You know. And I also noticed, and I may have picked this up years ago from Wayne Carlson's deal, but I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on it. I also noticed they're very susceptible to me stopping calling. Like, if I stop calling, they'll stop. But if I just I want I want to hear your guys' whole tactics, but I'll tell you mine, and then you can tell me maybe why I don't have as high of a hit rate. But I'll see them, and then if I get a reaction, I will constantly call until they're literally like close enough to shoot. and that's how I've had the best luck. I mean,
Yeah,
how do you guys do it?
pretty much like that. I mean, we call and break, and
Okay,
you know, it's similar to like a coyote call set. You call and then wait a minute, call, wait a minute. And I think that just kind of gives them time to line out and focus. But we've noticed the same thing, Huck Layton. We have a lot of video of it. Is when we're calling, they'll come on without the call, but like slowly and kind of curiously, and then it refocuses them. As soon as you hit that call, you've done it with enough. They just turn. They know right where they're going at that point. But we'll use the calling and not calling to get us the right shot opportunity. So we'll stop calling and let them mosey, kind of just let them
sure.
turn, and because they'll lose their way a little bit, and that gives us a time to put an arrow in them. But
Yeah,
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 you're right about that.
it
yeah,
gives us
yeah,
time to figure out what direction they're going to come in, because it's not always intuitive where it's not always the straight line. They'll circle to catch wind, and they'll go a totally different direction than you think they're going to go. So yeah, it does give you a chance to line things up, figure out, okay, if I'm going to stop this bear in a window in the trees, where am I going to stop it? But yeah, it reminds me of bass fishing. You ever fished like the spring spawn, and you're looking at this bass, and you've got a rubber bait or whatever, plastic bait, and you're just twitching it. And every time you twitch, you'll get a reaction out of the bass, and then they'll just hang tight. And you'll twitch, and you'll get a reaction. It's
yeah,
that same type of thing. In fact,
sure.
just recently, I called in a bear, just kind of playing around with the call in the field, and same thing. I called, and the bear would slow down. I call again, break into a run, and slow down. I call again, break into a run, all the way till we finally had to shoo it away because it was right in our faces. But yeah, it's a trigger response. Like I said, it's just like a
Yeah,
bat. They don't have to think about it. It's a trigger. So, but there are those. We had one situation last year where we called in two bears to the same set. The first bear came in on a string. We shot the bear, and then we just sat down and waited for it to expire. And while we were waiting, like this is like 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, another bear just walks in. So it had taken its time, it slowed down, but it was still coming to check out that fawn in distress. So they're going to come. They're going to come. That's been our
yeah.
experience with it. Uh,
Have you guys solely used fawn and distress calls?
It's the most effective. We've tried a few other things with no luck.
Yeah,
And I'm sure that I can't be sure, but I would guess that if you're within like eyesight of the bear and you have some other kind of squeaker call or something, I would guess that's probably gonna at least get their attention.
yeah,
Um, but just knowing that that's their like big ticket meal, that little fawn, and us
sure.
being so close around that season, that's just what's we've really stuck to.
Yeah, and that makes the most sense. Like, I mean, I know guys that have used like traditional like rabbit calls and that sort of thing, and they say they've called them in. I again, it goes back to a little bit of my lack of depth of experience with doing it. I've always used a fawn call, just because it seems like the most natural solution. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I will say, and it's interesting that you guys are making a call. There's not a whole lot of predator calls that are fawn calls, like in the
Right.
market. You know
There's
what
a
I
lot of
mean?
deer hunting calls that are fawn calls. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Is there a difference? I mean, not to like. Yeah, I mean, is the sound? Have you guys found that you're using a little bit different sound? I mean,
Honestly,
any
not as
thoughts there?
much. I we completely frank. It's mostly a marketing thing, whether it's for a deer or for a bear. I mean, both of them, you want to make a very realistic fawn sound. I would
Yeah,
say the only difference in perhaps the predator call fawn is that you want to be able to get a little more of like the desperate tones out of it, if that makes any sense. So you want to be able to like kind of lay into it a little bit more and get those kind of waning tones rather than more of just like a soft bleat,
yeah,
to get them kind of riled up. But really, you could probably do that with either. We with the way we made our calls, we just basically listened to fawns, real fawns, and also kind of perfected the realism of it. We wanted to make a because if you blow on a lot of fawn calls, they literally sound and are made mostly like a party horn.
yeah,
It's like meh, and it's not like a quality realistic sound. So that was kind of what we went for with ours, was to make it more realistic. It's not, maybe there's other fawn calls that are easier to blow and make the right sound, but we kind of wanted ours to be the right noise, so
Yeah, sure.
that's what we
Yeah,
went
yeah.
for. But yeah, it's I think ours is doubles as a fantastic doe call because we
Yeah,
call as many does as bears.
if not
sure.
more. Yeah.
Sometimes we've had them come in at the same time. We have on film calling a bear in, and here comes this bear over this hill, running up the hill. And then there's several does charging the bushes that we're in, ahead of the bear, trying to get the fawn before the bear gets there. And it's been wild. We've seen some wild stuff
That's
calling
true.
them.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah. No, it's and you guys and this is all on your YouTube channel.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, cool. And do you guys do is there how-to stuff on there too?
a little bit. This year, we're going to be building out a lot more of that.
Yeah, I
So
got you.
we,
Yeah.
we, we've got a video that comes with the call, right, Clayton? Or there's a QR or
Yeah.
something.
On the packaging on the call, there's a QR code you can scan. It's just a basic tutorial on how to use it, like how to blow, because you don't blow too hard because it'll squeak out,
Yeah, yeah, I know. And I've blown the call that you guys sent.
Yeah, okay. So you know what I'm
Yeah,
talking about. But
yeah,
yeah, so there is that tutorial video, but we'll do a lot of in the field type explaining because up until this year, this call just launched this year. So up until this year, everything prior to this year has been prototypes. We
sure.
actually took other calls, dissected them, changed the sound, moved the read, all the stuff. So this will be the first year we're hunting with our own call. So we'll be able to do a lot more
Well,
explaining.
a finished version of a market version of it.
Yeah,
Finish.
yeah, I got you. Sure.
Um, but yeah, I mean, we should really get. We've kind of loosely talked this year about, along with the regular hunt films, trying to provide some more in-depth content on how to call these bears in, rather than just showing people us calling bears in. Give a little more footwork on, other people could try it, how we do it, and see, if it works. So
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure you guys have a whole like just like elk calling and I mean, elk calling. I don't know how familiar you guys are with it, but I always view it as it's like it's really about 15% the sounds you're making. It's like it's a way bigger proportion is like the setup. You know what I mean? Like how you set up on them. I don't know if that relates to bear hunting, but all that stuff helps. Like I don't have any. I haven't repped enough bear calling to know how to do that myself. Like what's the most optimal way to do that stuff. You know.
Well, you got an open invitation if you want to come join us.
Yeah, I'd love to, man. It'd be fun, you know.
yeah,
Um,
the bears, we've honestly, it's like, this is going to sound crazy, but I mean, it's dead simple for us, what we've experienced so far. And we haven't really, I guess we haven't, with an educated mind, gone and put like data together and be like, okay, let's figure out all the nitty gritty of when this works, how. We've kind of just been like, let's call them in, and it works most of the time. But in any time, like you're talking about those feed sources, like we've got some hills that are like big acorn hills, uh,
mhm.
you know, off of a ridge line. And like, matter of fact, that spot that we called those two in, Clayton was just telling that story about, there's a bunch of acorn trees on that side of that mountain. And so we just get upwind of everything, or I mean, downwind of everything, uphill,
Yeah.
if the thermal's coming up, and just let her rip, go for a calling sequence. And those jokers are down there. They're just eating till they're full and they're bedding, and there's a bunch of rock piles and stuff in that area. And so some of it's knowing kind of what's around, or at least have an educated guess with, e-scouting. But I think one of the cool things about this calling setup is that, and something we're trying to encourage, especially guys in California, because we've got 80,000 black bears in California right now.
Sure.
We're trying to encourage guys, buy the call, stick it in your bino harness, and just have it with you during deer season. Because if you set your deer set, or whatever you're doing for your deer hunt, or if you're hiking to your deer spot and you're taking a break, just toot the bear call. Like,
Right.
it's not going to hurt. You're not doing anything else anyway, or your spot's played out, or you took a shot, or whatever. Hit the bear call and give it a little, 15, 20-minute set, because if the population's acceptable in that area, there's most likely a bear going to show up, if you do that a few times over. So,
Yeah. Well, it's another way to effectively hunt them, right?
yeah.
Because it depends, man. Like I've shifted a lot of my spot and stock stuff, and like there's areas in Colorado that like the spot and stock fall hunting, you're not going to be very effective. It's not. I mean, they're going to be eating the same stuff, but like in Colorado, you've got to find what they're eating. You've got to find the best of it. 'Cause I'm sure you guys have figured this out. Like there can be acorns everywhere, but bears are going to find the exact chunk that has the most acorns. You know, they're such optimizers, and kind of like what you said, you get concentrate. I think people don't realize that, you know, Ben. Like you guys have probably figured out the concentrations, but in the fall, there's spots that I hunt that I mean, I've had single afternoons where I saw 15 different bears. And then if you were a mile up the creek from me, you probably wouldn't have seen a single bear. You know what I mean? Because you weren't in like even though there's acorns there, even though there's chokecherry there, you weren't like where it was maximized, and they're all going to go where they're maximizing their time. You know what I mean? Like where they literally when they reach up and drag acorns off, they're getting the biggest mouthful every time. I think they literally go through that in their mind, like, hey, let's find the exact chunk. So they'll all be in like that exact chunk. And the thing is there's a lot of areas where those high producing feed sources you can't see into them because they're like they're in a river, like a lot of them are bottoms, and then you can't see into the bottom because of the vegetation.
Yeah.
But if you get into areas where you can see, it's like that's like the gold mine, right? You have to have topography that allow you to see the feed source and where the feed source typically is the best. And it's it's very simple. Usually in Colorado, it's like where you have low water, high water. That's what I tell guys. Like if you got low water, everybody knows that like Gamble's Oak will put more acorns on if it's on like a canyon. But if you have like a spring or an irrigation ditch or something like that that's running parallel to it, and then you get water up high that's coming down the hillside on that, then you have somewhere where not only is there a shitload of acorns, but you can actually see into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
Um, but yeah, it's I you guys have probably I would guess that part of your success calling is you're going into spots where you have the density of the bears, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you brought that up about the feed sources because I think there's one downside to calling bears and having the success that we've had, and that's that we haven't spent a lot of time just observing bears
Sure.
because we're calling where a lot of it's blind calling, and we're calling in bears from areas where we know they live, but we're not like actually sitting down and just watching them do their thing. We've done some of it, but I kind of wanted to pick your brain on because you've done a lot of that observing, and so
Yeah,
I
pretty much. Yeah, it's mostly mostly my style of hunting is.
yeah, and I think that's key knowledge as well. I'd like to kind of get your side of it and your experiences with like the biggest mouthfuls of acorns and how bears will interact to a feed source and all that. So yeah, well, I guess the first question to ask would be, what's the difference that you see between spring bears and fall bears, and the way they act, the way they eat, the way they move?
Around oh, the whole thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
an
the
overview. Yeah.
yeah, like the difference between because in the end there's quite a few there's similarities to like the time of day they're active and those sort of things, but in the spring they're typically more dispersed because they're eating they're for that big chunk of time when they first get up in almost all the areas I've hunted for the first 2 weeks they're eating grass. You know what I mean? So they're just eating grass, and then they'll move. Different regions they'll move to a different source of flowers. And in my mind, I view them as like kind of indicator flowers, like to the extent that like if you're in British Columbia, they'll be on just straight up grass on avalanche shoots for a couple weeks. And then the minute I start to see dandelions like on 2 tracks and that sort of thing just starting to pop out, I'll know that the bears will kind of shifted to that elevation. So there's these different feed sources that you focus on in the spring, but overall in the spring, they're more dispersed. They like the feed sources I'm talking about, you can kind of find them everywhere. In the fall, I get way bigger concentrations, and I think bears come from 100 miles away to come into a certain canyon and feed in the fall. and they hit that canyon where the feed's really good, and then they'll go back and den where they're going to wake up in the spring. Does that make sense? Like, I don't think I think for years, I mean, I shouldn't say think. I know that there's certain canyons that myself and guides that were working for me over like a 4 or 5 day period, or 4 or 5 year period, killed like 50 bears. And so there's no way those 50 bears lived in a stretch of canyon that was 3/4 of a mile long. It'd be impossible.
Right.
So those bears have to have been coming in there from like way. I mean, coming across basically like almost mountain ranges to get into those little canyons. You know what I mean? So to me, it's always been about that in the fall, is like finding the concentration. Whereas in the spring, they're a little more dispersed. You got to recognize what they're going to hit. But in the spring, you got to I mean, even if you kind of know there's bears around, like you got to put a lot of miles, you got to cover a ton of country. Does that answer your question,
Yeah.
Clayton? Like the difference? I view that the difference. I mean, the reality with spring hunting, over the years, I do a lot of spring like backpack hunts in the Frank Church and the Selway Wilderness, and they're really fun. Like I enjoy like fly-in deal, hiking in, doing all that. But that's not the most effective way to hunt spring bears. The most effective way to hunt spring bears and I did for years in British Columbia, and that's like logging road infrastructure, and where you have all that remote country, but you've got logging roads that you can drive 40, 50 miles an hour on. And we would cover 100, 150, 200 miles of logging road every single day. And it, because the bears are still pretty dispersed, and then we'd find where they were at, sign, glass them off the road, whatever. And then we would concentrate in on killing like one bear. Whereas in the fall, I was always concentrated in on like a feed source that I knew bears were hitting. And then different bears would come in over as the fall progressed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense.
That's what we've experienced in our spot too, is because we hunt the fall, is that we'll have a heavy concentration of bears in one spot
Yeah.
and different bears. We'll go to the same set. We went to the same set the next day one time, called a different bear in.
Oh yeah.
It was just like, one day was a sow and a cub. Next day was this big old black boar. So it was just like they're just cycling through, they're just, so it's got to be what you're talking about. I don't know how far they're going to come from where we're at, because we have like a coastal mountain range. It never gets too crazy cold or too crazy hot, really.
Sure.
So they're kind of all over the place. I mean, the furthest they can come from west would be, however, however far in your Cascade range up north, you only got 40 miles into there. In the Sierra Nevadas, that's a little different. On other sides, gets pretty heavy snow up in the top of the range and stuff. But that I guess there's a lot of it that's probably location specific as far as how far they may come from spring to summer or fall and then
Right.
go back. But that's really interesting. I'd love to see research on that in California and see what they're, because there's a lot of collar data on deer, but we don't really get any of that on bear in California. So
Yeah, they
it's like
don't have any.
they're
Yeah.
just kind of mystery creatures running around.
Yeah. There's been some, like, it seems like over the last, like I haven't been on top of it as much as I used to be, but over the last, I'd say, decade, there has been more and more research on bears in general, grizzlies and black bears, on like calf predation, just because everybody was like anecdotally seeing it. And so there has been a few big studies on that. And then when they've done those studies, they obviously get all the data, and dude, they move around way more than people think. Like even though you might feel like you have contained geography, I wouldn't be surprised if you have bears that are somewhere snaking out of somewhere from 100 miles away. You know what I mean?
It's wild.
I was surprised at what I saw. In some of that stuff, I was like, holy smokes! The distance they'll travel to kill calves is like crazy, like a couple 100 miles. Like bears going out of New Mexico all the way up, North San Juan's, doing big circles, and then going back to New Mexico to finish up the,
That is so
southern.
crazy.
Yeah. Well, you wonder, because it's like you look at these maps and you're like, well, they just walk across, essentially like deserts for 20 miles, and they're back into the mountains, and they have to. That's the only way they would do it.
Wow.
So yeah, it's interesting, but I'm sure it's a lot of the same dynamic. Like, bears go into spots. I'm not like in the fall. I'm not like sure day to day, like we see, a certain bear in there one day, see him, we'll see him a couple days or whatever. But to me, it's just more about the spots and getting where I can see the spot. And at any day, a different bear could roll in there. I think the bears just know, just kind of know the spots, and like you're talking about the observation thing, Clayton. Like I've got bears are cool. The calling deal is very intriguing to me because I haven't done it as much. Like I'd love to go with you guys just to see like how you do it. But when you observe bears in like those feeding areas, you can kind of they're not what I notice in the spring, like a sow will in general just keep her cubs away from boars. They just won't. They just don't tolerate them, and you can tell they're always keeping that buffer. But in the fall, you'll see sows will kind of tolerate them, and I think it's because the sows want to be in that same good food source. But like if you're watching a sow with cubs and say oak brush, right? And a lot of times in oak brush, a sow will kick her cubs up in the tree, like up in the canopy. And a lot of times you'll see that's why you'll find them. Like there's all these different little things you pick up, like because glass and feed sources in the West is you never find the bear. You find movement of the trees, you find cubs in the tree or whatever. You rarely will find the primary feeding bear because it's under that big canopy. It's so thick. But anyways, sometimes you'll find these little cubs or whatever, and then you'll find the sow and you'll start watching that sow. And after you've seen it a while, you can know immediately when a bigger boar or a bigger bear or boar has showed up somewhere in that feed source. Like you watch that sow and the way she like starts to move, like, oh, okay, I'm going to quit watching her because there's another bear here. I don't see him yet, but 100% he's here. And
Interesting.
you can figure that out. Like, and it's not like it might sound like a little woo woo and like, man, that might take a long time, but I've guided guys for 4 days. And on the third day, they know it. They see the exact thing and like the mannerisms of the bear.
Yeah.
It's not like it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure it out.
Yeah.
We've watched
Interesting.
similar things play out with deer and how,
Oh,
like,
sure.
in fact, we just did a scouting trip maybe 2 weeks ago, and this one knob, for some reason, animals were just flocking to this one knob. So it must have been a feed source. But there was 2 or 3 deer, and they were just kind of coming and going. And all of a sudden, their heads went up. They got really shifty. They would trot over here. They'd feed. They'd look nervous, and then they just cut out. And yeah, here comes this tank of a bear 5 minutes later, just
Oh yeah.
waddling up the hill. So yeah, similar type of. Once you observe, that's how I want to get your take on observation. You learn a lot by just watching them.
Oh
So
sure.
another thing I wanted to ask you was the day-to-day movements of a bear. So we've watched a lot of deer, and generally it's like, to give you an example, if if the deer are in bed first thing in the morning, you're not seeing a lot of movement, they're probably going to pop up at like 10, 11 o'clock, get some water, feed a little bit, go back to bed for the afternoon. Or you'll see them feeding first thing, and they're going to pop up a little earlier in the afternoon, but they're going to bed for a majority of the day when it's hot, things like that. So what is a day to day movement pattern for a bear in the fall? What does it look like?
Yeah, and I don't. It's funny, man, because I don't know that I noticed like a giant difference, I guess, in general from the fall to the spring. Like it's funny because I've had this debate with a bunch of people, like for instance, like Canadians, because in British Columbia, like those northern latitudes, they usually don't start hunting until like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. They never hunt in the mornings, and part of that is because, I mean, part of it is just logistically. If you start hunting at 3, you're still going to hunt till like midnight. You know what I mean? Because your day's so long. So as I hunted with those guys a lot, I always in the back of my mind thought, hey, like I wonder, because we're killing most of the bears like the last 2 hours of light. That's like in the afternoon. But I always questioned, hey, if we got up in the morning and hunted, would we have like the same success in the morning? It's always like was always a thought I had. And when I started doing more and more hunts on my own and then here in the States, I would do that periodically. And what I found is that we could kill bears in the morning, but it was usually like right in the morning. And it was usually when we knew a bear was in a patch of chokecherry or something like that. And we couldn't kill him the night before because of like we lost shooting light or something like that. And then we'd go right back in the morning. We catch him in the morning, almost as if we caught him before he went, before, like, just as he went back to bed. I think bears in the fall, I think they go into feed sources in the afternoon, and I think sometimes they stay in them all night long. And then they don't go back to bed until in the when the sun comes up. And so I think they're almost like, in a sense, they, people think that elk do that, but they don't. If you watch elk, like I've watched elk at night and like in the moonlight, a lot of times they'll become very active. They'll last like 30, 40 minutes of light. And then even in September during the rut in the mountains, they'll rut for an hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe till like midnight, and then they'll bed again at night. A lot of time, and they'll bed like in the open or whatever, but they'll do that. They don't actually, it's not like they're just active all night long. I think bears are active all night long, and the reason is that I see that behavior with them. Like they'll go into a feed source in the afternoon, and they'll just start feeding like crazy, and then I'll come back. If I'll come back just in the morning, I'll catch them leaving like right where they were feeding. But if you're there, if you're there an hour after light or whatever, you won't see anything. So that's kind of the trend that I've seen. Like, to me, the reality is I've killed them with guys like all sorts of, every time of the day, because you will randomly find them. But to me, the most dead period is probably like 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock. That's kind of like the dead period when they usually, like, what I've seen is a lot of times they'll bed, they basically bed down in these, like, the thick of these canyons. They go down in there. I don't know if you guys have ever actually glassed up bears that are bedded. Have you ever done that? Like, actually
Mhm.
seen them bedded?
Yep.
Yeah, like the ones I've seen, they literally bed like a dog. You know what I mean? Just like they'll find a little spot and just kind of almost curl up like a dog. And,
Mhm.
and and it's usually in those thick bottoms or whatever. And then a lot of times what I notice is sometimes they'll pop out, right, like, if there's topography, a drainage going up, you'll just see them kind of pop up out of the bottom, and then they'll be in the open, like in the spring if they're eating grass or whatever. And then in the fall, I notice what they'll do is I'm sure it's just because it's easier for them, but they'll use the canyon. They must be moving in like the canyon and the thick stuff when it's warm, and then they'll pop up somewhere where there's some elevation, and then they'll go along a feed source, and then they'll drop into a feed source. I see that a lot. I used to hunt irrigation ditches a lot, like not like private land irrigations. I used to hunt diversions a lot, like in the wilderness. There's a lot of these old diversions in wilderness areas that are still like grandfathered in, but they have water way up high, where the old time guys like went way up where they got vertical in the water and they cut like a ditch in the hillside. And those bears will go up in they'll go down, they'll obviously bed in those bottoms, and they'll go up and they'll catch a ditch or some sort of structure, and they'll walk the feed source house, and then they'll drop down right where the best berries are, the best
Hmm.
acorns or whatever.
They
Does
know
that make
what's
sense?
going on. Yeah.
Yeah,
They've
yeah,
got
they know. Yeah, they
got
just
the
use
drill
it
figured
to,
out.
you know.
What's funny is I've heard you mention a couple different times about spots that you find where you kind of need to find that little golden spot if you want to get all the activity in the fall, because they might be in a tight canyon that's really brushy, and you got to find the tight canyon that's really brushy that you can also see into,
Yeah.
that they're in doing their bear thing. And the cool thing about using the call that we have is we've been able to, there's a couple of canyons that we get into. One of them, we call it the hellhole, for obvious reasons if you've ever been there.
Sure.
But you go on that hillside, and it's one of those spots, and you can't see 100 yards, but if
Right.
you call, they show up every time.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're camped out in there, but you can't see them from anywhere. There's nowhere to look into that place, and it's just all trees and brush. But we go in there and call. Matter of fact, we took a kid. Clayton was hunting with him this last year, and he shot a Boone and Crockett bear. Called him in. It was rifle season, but he called him in to what time of the year was that?
It was
September.
it was the third week of September. So
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
called him in, shot him at however many yards, very close with the rifle.
it was like 40 feet. He was right in our faces.
Yeah. But it was but that hill they like, so it's interesting hearing that, and kind of connecting the dots and saying, yeah, we've found those spots using calls rather than found them like glassing. We'll just look in the
Yeah,
map for
sure.
next, figure out where it's steep, brushy, and nasty, and be like, okay, well, they're probably in there. Let's go look at the feed sources in there. And then sure enough, you call them and they come moseying out. So,
Yeah, and you got another tool you're utilizing. You don't really need to be able to see them,
right.
which is
And I think probably we're too impatient to sit and glass at them for too long during the fall because we got deer on our minds and other stuff. And it's like, let's just go get these things out of the brush real quick and make it happen.
yeah. Well, it's interesting, man, because I think part of the reason that I don't do like the calling without visually seeing them is because I'm kind of impatient. You know what I mean? Like it's like going in there and calling and hoping they show up. I'd rather get up somewhere where I can look and see and find them. You know
Sure.
what I mean? It's like a
Understand that.
different, but there's spots for sure, particularly when you guys said that you have such high success calling them in. There are spots in my mind that are like, man, that'd be a good spot to go in and try to call, and
Yeah.
see, because you're not gonna, a lot of guys, like, there's a lot of misinformation on like Western spot and stock hunting. Because what'll happen sometimes, I should say misinformation, but sometimes you just get lucky. You know what I mean? Like you happen to be in a spot there's a lot of bears in that you can't see in. It's like pretty much unhuntable, but you happen to walk through there when the wind's right and a bear's like in the open and you shoot it, right? Well, you could go back and hunt that same spot for 50 hours and you're never going to kill one.
Never going to see a
You,
thing.
you know
Yep.
what I mean? So you got to be a little wary of that stuff. But in those areas like that, they'd be like prime candidates for calling if you had like a high, if you felt like there was a high success of calling them into those spots. Um, so it's interesting as a tool.
Yeah, yeah, it's a fun way to do it, man. It really is.
I
It,
think there's a couple of different I don't know. I feel like some people we actually had a guy, so a buddy of ours we hunt with a lot. He's in a lot of our films, John. Uh he was like insulted, almost assaulted at an archery shop a couple of years ago by a guy telling him about how unethical it was that we would call bears in and that it's the wrong thing to do and all this stuff. And he was just like flabbergasted. He didn't know what to tell the guy. He's like, oh, okay, like, well,
What,
it's
what,
public
what was
land.
the guy's argument?
Just that it was unethical to call him for whatever reason. Like he didn't provide. I don't know. Maybe I have to ask John, but I don't know if he even provided an argument. It was just that, it was just unethical because it wasn't fair to the Bears or it wasn't fair chase or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, sure.
And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, all right, so should we call no game or how does this work? Who is this guy?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
People
but
are
we have
funny
run
about that.
across people that are like, I just don't care to call, which I totally understand. Like some people really like to hunt a certain way, and there's guys only like to archery hunt, only like to rifle hunt. There's pie for everybody, right? But
Yeah,
um,
and I don't mean to cut you off, Ben, but I think you're right to some extent. But I think the driving factor of those or people having those perspectives is they've never done it.
sure,
You know what I mean? Because I think that like man, I used to lion hunt a lot with hounds, and I can't tell you how many dozens of guys used to tell me that kind of shit, and I converted like 95% of them. You know what I mean? Like it may not be like their lifelong thing where they want to hunt with hounds for the rest of their life, but I the vast majority of them were like, "Oh yeah, that was actually pretty fun." You know what I
so
mean?
I would have to say, sorry, you can probably hear my kids screaming.
That's
Um,
all good, man.
I would have to say that I'm kind of one of those guys with bears and hound hunting.
Like you don't
And
you don't have interest in it?
I just don't. Like, I've
Okay.
been on hound hunts before. I've watched the whole thing unfold. I wasn't shooter or anything. I was just along for the ride. And it wasn't like it hurt my feelings or anything. I just was like, I don't, uh, you know, I don't really care to shoot him that way myself. I'd
Yeah,
rather,
sure.
because I know that there's other ways that I can do it that I prefer more. I'm
Right.
not I'm not gonna be like, "You shouldn't hound hunt." Like, I think it's totally fine. Anyone that wants to
Yeah.
do it, great. That's how you like to do it. But I just didn't get a lot of gratification in being like coming up to the tree and being like as the hunter. Now the houndsman, that's a totally different angle.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's mostly what hound hunting is about. It's about the hounds, if we're
Yeah, it's
being
about it's dog. Yeah, it's a
it's a
dog
dog
deal.
experience,
Yeah.
right? But
No.
as the
Yeah, and that
hunter,
and everybody's got their yeah. I mean, you find things that you like to I mean, to me it's kind of like duck hunting. Like I've actually duck hunted out in California a lot. Like people who go jump ducks, Like, I don't have anything against them, but I would never spend my afternoon jumping ducks off ponds. You know what I
Different.
mean? But I'd call them in, doing the whole decoy thing is just a kick in the butt, you
It's
know?
fun.
So
Yeah.
it's everything's a little different, you know?
Yep. Yep. Everyone's got their thing they're into for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
Well, and that's kind of been for us, like once we started calling bears, like that's become our thing. Like, man, this is so I can't get enough of it. They come in all slobbering and running and, just like right at you. And it's like,
Sure.
why would I shoot them across a canyon 500 yards when I can do this?
Yeah, no, and the thing is, dude, is like I'm intrigued by. I mean, I'm also intrigued by you guys' like high success doing it, or like high hit ratio, because I haven't had that same experience. And there's for sure a part in my mind. There's part of in my mind like, well, maybe that's just a function of not like committing to doing it on a
Sure.
lot of just kind of like figuring it out, because that's the case
And I
sometimes.
think it's also putting those two parts together that we just talked about a minute ago is that you've already got the intel on the bears, or even if you can kind of have some, uh, you know, you can kind of forecast some intel or guess of
Sure.
where you think a spot, or there's heavy feed areas or you find stomp trails or anything like that. That's when you put those two together. I mean, for people that are watching that they don't have a lot of experience bear hunting or hunting in general, if you just go out to a random, ridge and just start blowing your bear call, you're probably not going to call anything in. Possible, but probably not. But when
Yeah.
you put those two tenets together of like knowing bear habitat, knowing where they're most likely going to be, knowing that there's a lot of bears in the area, and then going in there, like you were saying, you were thinking about some spots that you could probably call them in at. That's what we do. We're like, okay, we know that the south facing slope here with all these trees, it's lots of acorns in this one spot, and there's lots of rocks here, big, house sized boulders. Okay, this is a bear spot. We're going to go in here and call, and
Yeah.
boom, they just come out running. So it's not purely like, the trumpet of magic, but
Yeah, of
but
course.
at the same time, it is very effective. And before we really honestly knew kind of how to put the parts together, we were just blind calling all over the place, and it was still had a really good success rate. So it's
Yeah.
kind of surprising.
Are you guys? Do you guys? Have you guys had a different experience in terms of the day, like when it's most effective?
I mean,
From sun
I
up
think
to sundown, that's when it's effective.
What's that? What's that, man?
I said it's from sun up to sundown. That's when it's the most effective.
So you haven't noticed a big difference?
Not really.
not really. I would say with a little bit of an exception being that we've killed more in the afternoon and evening than in the morning. Um, I don't know that is, it's like your, kind of anecdotal situation though. I don't know that that's a function of data. It may just be a function of when we kill them.
Yeah, yeah,
Because we've called them in all kinds of different times. But I really think that our proximity to their bedding area um, may
sure.
take some of that out of the question. Because if you're close enough, if you're within 100, 200 yards of their bedding area and you start tooting on that fawn call, um, you can probably motivate them to come out of their bed. You know what I mean? And that's what we've seen quite a few times. But other times, of course, in the evening, you're going to have them more active and moving around and ready to chase something. So I think that's probably lends itself to the higher success rate in the evening. But we have called them all times of the day, morning from daylight to dark, you know?
Yeah, which makes it an interesting tool too, because there's you could utilize part of the day. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's not necessarily
It's like
as
jump
like
shooting the ducks on the pond.
yeah,
They're all
yeah,
landed. Why don't you go find some and jump shoot them?
yeah. That's right. But in this case, it'd be a fun way to do it. So,
Oh yeah, for sure. For
but
sure.
yeah, yeah, no, it's intriguing, man. Like I want you guys to I kind of like want to hear exactly how you do it though. Like from soups to nuts. Have you done it on another podcast? Because I don't want you guys like have to repeat it. But like like what your setups like what your what sounds you make, the whole deal.
Honestly, this is gonna, I mean, giving away all our deep dark secrets, but it's really simple, and we're promoting it for people to know. I mean, but it's really straightforward. It's a lot like a coyote calling set, like any predator calling set. We find, like we said, do a little research ahead of time. And for us, some of the spots, we obviously base it off of former knowledge or whatever. But if we're going into a spot blind, we do some research, figure out where we think there's good feeding habitat. places we've noticed a lot of does and fawns, different things that play into
Sure.
it. And then primarily, we don't usually call first thing in the morning because we usually sleep in and eat good breakfast when we're bear hunting with calls.
Sure.
As why, Um, so by the time we get out there, the thermals are coming up. So we usually approach all of our bear calling spots from above, come down a ridge line, off of a logging road, something like that, and then just get to the edge of whatever brush, timber, whatever we're going to be at calling, where we think the majority of the bear activity is inside of,
Sure.
um, and or where they're sleeping or hiding out or whatever. Because like you said, they're going to most likely be asleep. So we want to get into that area where there's all that cover, kind of on the top edge of that zone, and we try to just call them up to us. And that's mostly what's worked out for us. We get into the call set, and we'll call for average what, Clayton, 20 to 30 minutes,
Yeah,
sometimes
30
longer.
minutes is kind of our okay. If nothing's happened in 30 minutes, we'll find the next spot. But another method we use is like what he's describing is more of like a tight cover setup, or there's not a lot of visibility. We're calling into a dark area.
Mm-hmm.
Another method we've used is that we'll pick a spot where sound carries, maybe at the bottom of a draw where our wind is going up behind us, but we were calling up into it like 2 or 3 fingers, and we
Yeah.
know our sound's going to carry quite a ways. Um, because it's not going to travel forever, the sound. But if you set yourself up where it's going to echo, you can cover more ground with your call. So that's another method when you're kind of calling into more of your open areas. But yeah, 30 minutes or so. It's kind of the
30
breaking point.
minute 30 minutes and then move to another spot. And then when you're in open spots, are you actively glassing for them, or you just
We're watching
Yeah,
mostly.
yeah.
You're going to see
most,
them.
it's a bear when they walk out. If they're 800 yards,
Yeah, you
you're
know
going to
it's a
see
bear.
them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but yeah, that's another I was going to skip over. I forgot to even mention, but that's another thing we do is and a lot of times just to visualize them. If we're an open area like that, sometimes we'll call in a spot that we can't really get to them, or they might not be able to get to us that well. But then you start seeing them moving around, and then it's kind of like a spot and stock ish calling thing, where
Yeah.
we see where they're at. If they're too far, we'll move to somewhere we know they have a good approach, and then continue the sequence. But yeah, it's kind of touch and go with that kind of thing. But best case scenario is when you start calling, be in a spot you can shoot them. But occasionally we've done it the wrong way around and it worked
Yeah,
out.
try not to get in a situation where you got to move once you know they're coming or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah,
yeah.
no, I got just
A
because
lot of times
they're
though, with the
looking.
topography, we can plan it.
Yeah,
Like, hey, they're going to go down into this wash, and then we got to just make tracks over to
move.
these
Yeah,
brush piles over here or whatever. So,
yeah, and you
but it's
find that they'll come in straight upwind, like they won't always hook around or anything. They'll just come.
sometimes they come just dead upwind,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
straight in.
yeah.
Like matter of fact, yeah,
And
yes,
that's been my experience with them too. Like, and I'm warped by elk. You know what I mean? That like basically, if elk you're in anything open, they're going to try to wind you. But
yep.
the bears that I've called in have been that it's almost like they just didn't really give a shit. Like they were more concerned about getting there quicker than anything else.
Yeah, we have had them circle a little bit, but mainly I think that's mainly a function of the topography. Like we were standing on a large boulder last year, like a house sized rock, and it was a cliff underneath us. And then the bear was coming up toward us, and he was
Mm-hmm.
kind of going downwind of us, right? But I think he was just trying to circle around to get up on the rock we were on
Oh,
because that's
okay.
where we heard it coming from. So it's kind of a bad setup. We should have gone to the bottom of the rock, kind of on the side, but it was one of those things that we had a subscriber with us, and everything was kind of just falling.
Yeah, I
However,
got you.
we were
Yeah.
like, well,
Do
this is
you do
what
you
it
guys
is.
do you feel like you call in more boars than you do sows?
Not,
It's
I
a
wouldn't,
mix.
yeah, I wouldn't say so.
I mean, we've called
Yeah,
in out with
sows
cubs.
come in with cubs.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And whenever they come in, the cubs hold them like pretty tight to the sow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right behind them, right on their heels.
yeah,
Like, what's going on, mom? They're like
yeah,
trying to keep up, figuring out what's happening.
yeah. And so I've called in I think two sows with cubs, and I noticed the same thing. And I'm very observant of that because when you're spot and stalking them, if particularly if they're like the year before, if they're like they were born in the den the year before. a lot of times the cubs will be really far away from them. Like because they're just meandering around and feed or
Right.
whatever, and they'll be 120, 150 yards away. So you got to be like really cognizant of it. But I have noticed when I called them in that they were like all together, which is good from a hunting perspective. You know what
Right.
I mean? Just so you don't
You can
so
ID that.
they make a
Yeah.
mistake or something. But
Yeah.
yeah, kind
Yeah.
of
We've only seen at this point, we've only had him come in with little cubs.
yeah, the
We
little
haven't
bitty guys.
seen him with the more juvenile cubs yet. But yeah, we're in the wild west of bears over here, man. It's a crazy thing. It's really fun. I know it's not going to last forever if we can get our you know, if our department can get their act together and get some better, regulations around bear hunting and get some more bears on the ground, maybe open a spring season or something. It's kind of a bittersweet because the glory days of calling in bears every 15 minutes will go away, but but our deer herd will really benefit from it. So
Yeah, but I have to give it to you guys for like being adaptable, like adapting to it, because to me that's like where you find some of the best opportunities. It's like we can sit and bitch and whine about what the fish and game guys are doing or whatever, but we're like, you can be pretty innovative about how you hunt stuff. And
mhm.
it's kind of magic. Like you might be doing like the magic hunt right now that not a lot of people have figured out yet. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? And those they come and go. I like honestly in Colorado 10 years ago, I felt that about spot and stock fall, spring, fall, like September, first 15 days of September. I had archery guided elk hunters my whole life, and believe me, archery elk hunting like pays the bills and sells more gear and backpacks and bows than everything else combined. But there was a period of time where I would way rather be bear hunting the first week of September because I knew I would see 7, 8, 10 bears a day. You know what I mean? And it's just like, that's awesome. And for a period of time, like I felt like, oh, I kind of figured out this special hunt.
yeah,
And then I was in the business of guiding hunters. So it was also good that because it was lucrative for me because I could sell 3-day hunts and guys were having a blast. And so I enjoyed it in that regard too. I think you guys are probably a good example of like how having flexibility, regardless of like management stuff and all of that, it can pay off in like a pretty huge way. There's not like the reason I mention it, man. I'm not like trying to pander to you guys. Is there's too many guys that get stuck into this mindset that they only want to do one kind of hunt because that's kind of like how they entered hunting. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to do any other hunts until I kill bull elk in a wilderness area with my bow. It's like,
yeah.
well, you might be doing that for like 18 years straight, man. You know what I mean? Like, so I got to give it to you guys for like uncovering some, and there's a lot of like hunts out there like that
Oh, yeah.
I think are probably way underrated.
There's all kinds of fun stuff to do. You just got to play the cards in your hand. It's like
Yeah, sure.
it's what we've got to work with, and we were bummed out with our deer, herds because the bears have been between the bears and the lions doing the 1-2 thing. They're just smashing our deer herds. And there's a lot of data in California to back that up too. But so we were like, man, well, let's just focus on bears. And now, really, our opening archery weekend, which is our deer opening weekend for deer archery, in the areas that we hunt, we really are pretty much hunting bear. I mean,
Yeah.
we know how it's deadly. If it's like you talked about, it's like, yeah, it's deer season right now, and if we see a good buck, we'll make a play on him, but we're gonna get our bear tags filled because they're right here.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
sure. Sure. And you
so
guys, and I apologize for being naive on this, but in California, there's no lion hunting. Period.
period.
Okay, so
Since
no spot and stock stuff, none of that. Yeah.
Only
So
hired fishing game contractors who are paid by the
yeah,
taxpayer.
yeah,
Yeah,
you can't even
yeah.
transport a mountain lion from that you killed from legally from out of state back into California.
Right. That's wild, man. I remember that back when like one of the fishing game guys or something went on like a legal hunt and it was a big hoopla or whatever.
yeah,
But that's the reason I thought about it is because there's several states like Oregon and some other states where you can hunt them, but you can't hound hunt them, and hound hunting is obviously the most effective way, or at least historically it has been. But it's kind of I don't know if you guys have run into this, maybe via your YouTube channel or whatever, but there's guys that are developing systems to call lions in that are getting really good at it.
Mm.
Where it used to be kind of, it used to be very much like a random thing. You might call one into your coyote setup or whatever, but there's guys that are getting it like dialed. It's kind of, and they're doing all sorts of, I don't really like want to get too deep in it, because I don't want to, some of these things, like there might be, the guys doing it, they may not want to like talk about the details of their strategy or whatever. Like you guys are very open about your bear stuff, but there's guys doing stuff with like the trees they're calling them from, and and using like decoys and all sorts of stuff, and they're being very effective. And so it's kind of cool, because it gives them an opportunity, whereas they can't. There's really no other effective way to kill lions because of the way the fish and game managers are. People kind of figure out a new way to do it.
Well, I mean, traditionally, lions have always been, well, and kind of bears too, until the spot and stock thing and the spring thing really took hold. But the lions have really been traditionally, it's like, you're going to hunt them with hounds or you're just not going to kill a
Yeah, that's
lion.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, yeah. But guys are figuring it out. Kind of, I guess, kind of parallel to what you guys are doing with bears.
Yeah, it's just finding that gap. New methods to hunt the same game. It's
Oh
fun.
yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, for sure. I like it. I mean, you guys have intrigued me. You've got me back into, I've kind of done it as like, had it in my back pocket, like, hey, let's see if this works type of thing. So I now you guys have motivated me to be like, oh, I gotta like get up to speed on this deal. Because if these guys are getting almost all of them to come in, something's screwed up.
That's great.
Well,
Well,
you'll have to come out with us and get a trial run on it. We'll get
Yeah, I'd
you
love to.
get you off the starting line, at least where we're at. I mean, you probably do it better than we do, but yeah, it'll be fun. We've got a few people coming out this year for our subscriber hunt in a few weeks here,
Awesome.
um, that we're going to be doing, and it's going to be cool. Our call we're making through born and raised outdoors. We've kind of developed and designed and everything, and then we're selling it through their brand.
Okay.
Um, and so we're trying to convince Trent or Steve or someone to come down for the subscriber hunt and shoot a bear with us. And so we're gonna have a squad down there. But anyway,
Awesome.
we'll have to get you out at some point that next year or something, and do a
Yeah, for
bear.
sure.
It'll be fun, man.
Yeah, I'd love to do it, man. I'm up for it for sure.
that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. This was a fun conversation. It's fun to tap into some expertise whenever we get the chance. So we need to do this again and talk elk hunting. I'd love to pick your brain. We're elk hunting newbies. We've had our chances here and there, but we're not pros by any means. So I'd love to pick your brain on that one of these days.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we can do it.
Okay.
Absolutely, man.
Okay.
But thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah,
Yep,
it's been a pleasure.
absolutely, man. It's a
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Yep.
All right, y'all. Well, we will see you on the next episode.